On this week's Eastern Conference edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, the playoff race is heating up. Plenty of teams with still at least an ounce of hope, but who are the real contenders and who are just stringing along to end the schedule? We'll get into all this. Plus, the GM meetings are ongoing. Could we see some new rules implemented into the NHL? We'll get into all that and more on today's edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, including on YouTube, where a like, comment, and subscription go a long way to helping the show grow. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me 5 days a week over at Locked On Ottawa Senators, alongside Gil Martin from Locked On New York Islanders, one of the teams we will be discussing as still in the mix for a playoff spot. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. I just used Gametime yesterday. Super easy. And with a new account, you can use code LOCKEDON for a $20 discount on your first ticket purchase. Today is Wednesday, March 20th. And Gil, living and dying by every goal or what over in New York?
Yeah, well, mostly dying lately. Unfortunately, Islanders now 0-4-1 in their last five, and picked a very bad time to go into a losing streak.
It felt like for a while there, nobody wanted that wild card spot. Detroit had lost 7 of 8 before getting a big win last night over Columbus in overtime. We had the Islanders, as you mentioned, and it felt like the only team that was really rolling were the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are now 7-2-1 in their last 10 games. They've won 4 in a row and have put a little bit of distance into themselves and the pack. But beyond that, I mean, Detroit sitting at 76 points. They wake up Wednesday in that final playoff spot. Washington, with 2 games in hand on Detroit, are only 1 point back. And then even though the Islanders are now 3 points back, they not only have a game in hand on Detroit, but maybe more importantly, they've got a head-to-head meeting on Thursday night. Just how much of a swing do you think that would help the fan base in Long Island if they're able to get a win there tomorrow in regulation?
Yeah, in regulation is the key, and it would be a big wake-up call for the team, and it would certainly help the fans' feelings a lot. But starting to run out of time right now with just 14 games left on the schedule, so this game is huge.
Do you think Patrick Roy is the kind of guy, maybe not with 15 games left, but where he'd pull the goalie in a tie at the end of regulation if he felt the team needed to get 2 points and not go to overtime?
Oh, I don't doubt that. He's pulled goalies 4 or 5 minutes left in the game, down by 2, down by 3. He did it in Colorado years ago when he was the head coach there, so wouldn't surprise me at all.
How's the Patrick Roy era been going so far on Long Island?
Well, I mean, you had the 6-game winning streak just before the trade deadline. That was going well. I think fundamentally they're playing better hockey, especially in their own zone under Patrick Roy. But bottom line is that, even a great chef needs quality ingredients to give you a great meal.
Oh, I like that one. So when it comes to the wild card race right now, who are you most worried about? Is it Detroit? Is it Washington?
I think Detroit is the team that I'm most worried about. Like, to me, Detroit is finding itself. They had the long losing streak, which nobody expected, and now I get the feeling they're going to be back on track. So that's the key. I think either Detroit or Philadelphia are the teams that are most vulnerable, and I'm not sure how Washington is doing it. They're getting hot at the right time, but their goal differential is -27, and yet here they are fighting for that last playoff spot.
Well, their season's almost gone the way Alex Ovechkin's season gone, right? And it makes sense. You kind of take on the personality of the leader of your team. But in the first half of the season, Ovechkin couldn't buy a goal. And then in recent months, now he feels like the run towards Wayne Gretzky it went from a limp to a sprint, kind of, where in his last 20 games, Ovechkin's sitting with 12 goals right now and 21 points. So he's got 9-9 points wise in the month of March, and really kind of setting this team on the right foot. Not to mention Charlie Lindgren, one of the more underappreciated goalies this year, and he's just been lights out for the Washington Capitals, a .915 save percentage. He's won 4 of his last 5 starts and is 18-11-5 on the year. So lots of good stories out of Washington. But you're right, man. When you've got a minus goal differential that chilly, it's tough to make up ground and even get wins. But they're finding a way and are only 1 point out of the race. Now, would you draw the line with the Islanders? Because I know the Sabres had that little faux run there for a little while. They were feeling good about themselves, but they had a critical loss recently that felt like it was the final nail in their coffin.
Yeah, I mean, the Islanders are getting close to that line just because there are so many teams competing right now. And the thing about the Islanders all year, they have been so inconsistent. One night they can go out and beat the Colorado Avalanche or the Boston Bruins and look really good doing it. And then they'll lose to the San Jose Sharks in overtime after holding a lead. So the inconsistency of the Islanders seems to be the most consistent thing about them.
Yeah, no doubt. So that's where you're kind of drawing the line, where at least with the Islanders, though, there's 2 opportunities for them, right? When you get into Buffalo and you're in the Atlantic, you're not getting a top 3 spot. You just simply aren't. So you only have the wild card to attain.
Right, because the Islanders could still catch the Flyers in the Metropolitan Division, but the Flyers seem to be finding themselves a little bit more lately as well after they went through a little mini slump. So won't be easy. And the loser point for overtime and shootout games makes it harder to gain ground, even though you may only be 3 or 4 points back. It's not as easy to make up those points.
It's been a really fun ride, but it feels like you kind of wish with 15 games left that a couple more teams were in the race. Maybe not for you with the Islanders and being one of those teams, albeit 3 points out right now. But in both conferences, we don't have that sprint, at least, where any night there's different teams that are bouncing in and out. We almost did, but then Tampa decided to get their act together, and it would have been criminal to not see this Tampa team at least 1 or 2 more times in the postseason. I know they've had a lot of turnover with their roster, but Braden Point still in that superstar age category as well, and Stamkos, the uncertainty around him being a UFA after this season. Vasilevsky hasn't been himself since coming back from off-season surgery, but they're starting to round into form. And wouldn't it be tough? You win your division, and all of a sudden you got the Tampa Bay Lightning waiting for you as an underdog in round 1. So lots of intrigue here with the Eastern Conference wildcard race, but there's a few teams who are just battling for positioning right now, and that is what we will discuss next, is which team needs to win their division to avoid that daunting 2-3 matchup. We'll have that conversation next, and then with the GM meetings, rule changes are coming. One has already been implemented. We'll let you know what that is, and then we will also get into some changes that could be coming, but that will need to pass the Board of Governors approval. That's all next. You're listening to Locked On NHL. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. It's the drive, the passion, the everything that they do at eBay Motors. eBay Motors has everything too, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, welcome back. Locked On NHL, your team every day. Shout out to the everydayers out there that get your local experts on the biggest stories. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me at Locked On Ottawa Senators. That's Gil Martin over at Locked On New York Islanders. And we already discussed the Isles in a dogfight to even make playoffs. But what about the teams that have already all but wrapped up a spot? There's 3 in the Atlantic Division and really only 2 that are battling for positioning. And then in the Metropolitan, we already discussed the Philadelphia Flyers are kind of either third place in the Metro or fighting for the final playoff spot, whereas 2 teams at the top, the Rangers and Hurricanes, are jockeying for positioning. So that brings up the conversation. Where is it more important to finish first? The Atlantic Division to avoid the Toronto Maple Leafs, or the Metropolitan Division, where you're in all likelihood going to get a weaker opponent potentially in the 2-3 matchup?
Yeah, I think the Atlantic Division is definitely more important. I mean, to get the Maple Leafs in the first round is not easy. Not that, either of the wild card teams would necessarily be easy outs, but I think you want to avoid Toronto in the first round if you can.
It's kind of ironic to say that because they've obviously had struggles getting out of the first round, albeit they did last year, only to lose in 5 games in round 2. Nobody was beating that Florida Panthers team, though. But to me, it's almost like if you're the Leafs, you want to get past your demons, and that could come in either form because they've had trouble. I think they're 0-4, if not 0-3, against the Bruins in the last decade plus in the playoffs. But Florida just coming off knocking them out last year. I think the Leafs actually match up better against Boston. Florida's the type of team that's going to take you into the alleyway and beat you up just as bad as they're going to, beat you on the score sheet. And I think Toronto in the past, I know they've tried to add more truculence, to use an old Brian Burke phrase, but they added the Tyler Bertuzzis and the Max Domis of the world, and they're trying to find ways. And I'm not going to add Ryan Reeves in because in a playoff series, I think he's realistically only going to be inserted sporadically, if that. But for me, if I'm the Leafs, I'm hoping to get the Boston Bruins because they're a team that has more overtime losses than they do regulation. It feels like if you add those 2 together, they've got less wins already than the Florida Panthers, despite being ahead of them in the standings. So I think that in terms of importance to win, it is the Atlantic, but also I think the Florida Panthers would be feeling pretty good going up against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round as well. So I'm kind of, a little bit on the fence in terms of if you're Florida, what you want. But I mean, to get the Flyers, no offense, but to get the Flyers in what they thought was a rebuilding year, I think that would be a win for either the Rangers or the Hurricanes.
Yeah, no question about that. And the Flyers are kind of a year ahead of schedule, as you alluded to. And I think for them, that they would be happy to be there. And as far as Boston versus Florida, I just think Florida is built more for the playoffs and the style of hockey that they play, and their physicality will make them a more difficult opponent.
I can't wait for the playoffs. 2 best weeks of the year. First round of the playoffs. There's no doubt. And
Yep.
I'm somehow hoping, and I don't think it's very possible, unlikely maybe would be more of an appropriate term, but if we could get the Panthers and the Lightning in the first round again, the Battle of Florida, there's some certain matchups that I want to see. Like, again, not super realistic unless Vegas gets their act together out west, but I'd love to see Winnipeg play Pierre-Luc Dubois, have that storyline coming in, and there's great storylines that you can kind of manufacture as we'll have a week to do so leading in to that first round playoff series. But Rangers Islanders, could that be another one? Maybe.
Hasn't happened since 1994. It's time.
Wow, that
Yeah.
would be great to see. I'm cheering for that one as well. Let us know in the comments what your favorite playoff matchups could potentially be. Be somewhat realistic, but you can have some fun with it as well. And if you're a fan of a team like mine, the Ottawa Senators, you're more looking at the tankathon right now and looking at, hey, how high can we draft? What's our odds of getting Macklin Celebrini, who is going to be the no doubt first overall pick? And it almost feels like at the bottom of the standings, Gil, we're breaking it into to trios right now, whereas
Yep.
the bottom three, I mean, they are so far gone, all in the Western Conference, and some elite tanking going on with Anaheim losers of 7 in a row, San Jose losers of 5 in a row. It's a bit of a race to the finish at the same time.
Yeah, it's all about those ping pong balls now, I guess. So
It's
trying
brutal.
to get a spot in the draft lottery and get more ping pong balls. But yeah, the tanking thing, I get it. It kind of gets frustrating sometimes when you're fighting for a playoff spot and one of the teams you're fighting is playing one of those tanking teams.
Yeah, or even when a team that you're like hoping, you're like, oh, I'm scoreboard watching tonight.
Right.
For example, you last night, you're watching the Columbus Blue Jackets take on Detroit, and Columbus is winning almost the whole game, and they can't close it out, and they're probably happy about it. They're probably like, oh, why'd we get 1 point? That's brutal. But yeah, it's a bit of a paradox right now where you're seeing some teams really putting their pedal down to try to get some wins, and other that are almost taking their foot off the gas pedal. Some of them are already planning their summer vacations, and it's kind of that time of year, which is why it makes the first round that much better when you're able to kind of come together and everybody is fighting for that big silver trophy, the best trophy in sports, the Stanley Cup. We'll have local experts on the biggest stories all playoffs long. Just make sure that when your team qualifies, go check out the opponent's Locked On show. You'll get local experts on the biggest stories throughout the 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. We will be here each step of the way. More on the other side, the GM meetings going on, and all the GMs went golfing the other day. We know the stories get rolling. Not only that, but that's when, they set the tone for what could happen this summer. And I know that lots of fans, they almost like the summer as much as the season itself because there's drama, there's transactions, there's projections, everything. The hot takes get flowing in the summer. And again, when I say we're your team every day, I mean it. We're here in the summer as well. 5 days a week. We'll bring you right up the draft in Vegas and all you need to know. Make sure for more, you're checking out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Those fellas will get you set for your playoffs if you're playing fantasy right now. And Locked On NHL Draft Prospects, as those fellas are really gearing it up as we get into draft season. We already mentioned we've got your team every day here at Locked On NHL. The next one, we've got power rankings on Thursday, and then Gil will be back on Friday with Rachel Donner to take you in to the weekend. So look forward to that coming up on the channel. But next on the show, what rule changes could be implemented into the NHL? That conversation is next. You're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Go download the Gametime app, create an account, and you will be able to get $20 off your first ticketing purchase. You shouldn't ever have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in pricing, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. What are some of the things I love about Gametime? Well, let me tell you, the view from your seat is key. I never want to be surprised when I get to my seat. And with Gametime, you click the seat and boom, a photo comes of what your view will look like. It sounds like a monotonous thing, but it really is critical. You don't want to sit down and have a pole right in front of you. You don't want to have anything but the best view. And with Gametime, not only are they giving you the best views, they're giving you the best prices. With their killer last-minute deals, you're able to get the Gametime guarantee. With the Gametime guarantee, you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, you'll get $110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On NHL, your team every day. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me Locked On Senators. That's Gil Martin over at Locked On New York Islanders. When the GMs get together, they're always cooking up something, and it seems like now rule changes are on the agenda. plenty of potential rules we'll get into, but one immediate change, and this one won't affect the on-ice product because it's actually something that happens on the bench. Players will no longer to be able to have their legs over the bench while not on the ice. That's those guys who are too excited for their next shift. They're like, put me out, coach. Hey, guy on the ice, you see me, right? You see me. Come here. It's my turn to go on the ice. And Gil, it sounds like this is due to a safety concern as a linesman, and that's almost like their safe space, right? If they need to get out of the way, they jump up onto the board. So get those sharp blades out of the way.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, look, as much as we fans don't always want to acknowledge it, referees and linesmen are people too. You don't want them getting injured. Those skate blades, as we all know, can be very dangerous. So, making sure that they have that safe space, as you said, very important for them. And I think it really makes sense.
It makes a ton of sense. So that will be implemented right away, whereas other rules are still in consideration. They'll have to pass the Board of Governors. So here are the proposed changes, courtesy of Elliot Friedman with Sportsnet. Adding a goalie to the list of players who can get a penalty for intentionally dislodging the net feels like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that happen so often, well, not so often, but often enough. And it's kind of easy for the goalie to say, "Oh, whoops, my shoulder got under the crossbar," and meanwhile the other team is taking a barrage of shots. I think this one is a no-brainer. I hope the league passes it.
And then you're looking a little bit further down here, and you have other rule changes like, how about this one? On a face-off after an icing right now, defensive centers get a warning for a violation, but offensive centers get tossed. Now there's asked for a warning both ways. That, again, makes sense. If only it'll create the tiniest little bit more offense, but why wouldn't you make it so that the offensive player will have their best face-off man in more likely so that you get an offensive zone face-off win is good for offense, which is good for goals, which is good for scoring in the league.
And which is good for ticket sales. So, yeah. This one makes sense, and I think the league will probably implement it.
I'm not sure what the thing was now. I feel like it was wherever the puck was closest to is where the faceoff would be. But now they're asking that if a goalie loses his mask, that the other team gets to pick which side the faceoff is on in the offensive zone. Again, a minimal change, but feels worthwhile.
Yeah, it does. And when the goalie loses his mask, that can negate a scoring opportunity for the other team. So you give them that little consolation of choosing where the faceoff is going to be. I think that makes sense.
Oh, here's a funny one. If a player refuses to play the puck off a high stick or hand pass, the non-offending team will get a face-off one zone better than where it actually occurred. So we see this often, right? Where it's played with a high stick, a player on the team that has the high stick is able to touch it, but instead they just kind of like sit there and wait, and they waste time, and then they hope that the other team does it, and there's this stalemate. So I'd be happy to see that little intricacy get removed.
Yeah, I mean that stall is always it's annoying as a fan. You're just like waiting and waiting. Touch the puck. Let's get on with it. It's going to happen. I think that also is a logical thing to change.
Last one here. Just what the NHL needs, Gil. More video review. The new proposal says that now you will be able to challenge a puck over the glass delay of game to prove that it did hit something. So this is obviously only for when a penalty is called.
And I think this is a good one. It can't hurt to have that reviewed. And because it's a coach's challenge, it's limited. They can't do it every time. It's going to be a situation where, they have to pick and choose when they're going to do it. But having that reviewed by replay, to me, it does make sense because penalties are on the line and that could change the course of a hockey game.
Well, and get this, Gil, because it's only going to be called, you can't call it to be like, it didn't hit something, you missed the call. You can't do it for that. It's only if it's a called penalty, you can say, no, it clearly hit something.
Right.
It wasn't a penalty. So because it's already a penalty, Gil, if you're wrong and you challenge this, it's a 2-minute 5-on-3 against you. So I think that will also, you have to be so sure, because would you rather just kill off one or two?
Yeah, no, you've got to have your coaches in the press box watching really carefully and making a quick judgment call in order to implement that. But again, it's not going to happen often because of the risk, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to review in certain circumstances.
This one I'm a little less sold on. And look, right now you can argue 4-minute reviews for a high stick for a double minor if it was a teammate stick that actually hit them, or their own stick, which does happen. However, now they want to be able to challenge, even if it's just a 2-minute high sticking penalty. To me, I feel like we're kind of getting it. Like, are we going to be able to challenge hooking and tripping and everything soon? Like, where are we going to draw the line here?
Yeah, you don't want too many challenges over the course of a game. It does slow down the tempo. So this one's a little more iffy. There still has to be judgment calls in this league. It's still officiated by human beings. I don't mind checking them occasionally, but you don't want to micromanage every little call.
That's where I'm curious on, though, and it's just like, where is it going to end? And maybe that's something that the competition committee will discuss, because none of these rules outside of the first one have been implemented. So we'll have to keep that in mind here as we keep it rolling down the stretch. And these would be implemented. You'd think they'd have the meetings in the summer and have these implemented to start the 2024-25 season. Another year where I will have misguided hope for my team to finally break a playoff drought. Gil, always love doing this with you, man. It's really fun to have a time of year where, look, we had the trade deadline. All that rumor mill stuff is very fun. But at the end of the day, the best part about hockey is these meaningful games down the stretch as you come into the playoffs and you want your team, even if you're a team that's clinched months ago, not officially, but you know what I mean. It's one of those where you want to be playing at your peak heading into playoffs. It's an awesome time to be covering the team and the league on the daily. And for more coverage, you can check us out on all of our shows, Locked On New York Islanders, Locked On Senators. Whenever something happens around the league, you know we'll have local experts breaking it all down. Gil, you have any final thoughts on today's show?
Just wanted to mention the unfortunate passing of Chris Simon at the way too young age of 52. Uh, Apparently had a very difficult time after hanging up his skates, and certainly send my condolences to his family and friends. And taking his own life at such a young age, it's tragic.
It really is. And just know out there, if anyone's struggling, you're not alone. There are plenty of help resources that you can call, and people are there for you. Never feel like you're alone. And really tragic events. We're thinking of Chris Simon, his family, and very, very small town that he's from, Wawa, Ontario. And that community has to be reeling, a town of under 3,000 people. So, man, he made it to the big leagues, led the Washington Capitals in goals one year. Obviously was known for being, a protector of his teammates and a guy who was never going to back down. But man, just awful news. Chris Simon passing away at the age of 52. Thoughts and prayers are to with everybody who knew him and everybody who loved the way that he played, man. He had a huge fan base and was a very, very popular teammate. You can tell just from all the tributes that are spilling out on social media from former teammates, colleagues, and guys who knew Chris Simon. We'll leave it at that for today. For Gil Martin, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, your team every day.